and welcome to part 4 of the beginner sewing series by the Kozy Cure. In this video, we will finally be sewing our cloth napkin. If you have followed along from the previous videos, you know what supplies you need, how to set up your sewing machine, and how to prep your fabric for this project. But before we begin sewing the project, I'm first going to show you how to sew a straight line. Let's begin. To sew a straight line, start by placing your fabric under the presser foot and lining the edge of the fabric up with the seam guide on your machine. I'm going to be using the seam guide that says 5/8, so I will be doing a 5/8 inch seam allowance, with the seam allowance being the area of fabric between the edge of the material and the stitching line. So the first thing you're going to want to do to sew your line is backstitch. To backstitch, you're going to go forward with your foot pedal about 4 to 5 stitches. Then you're going to want to hit your backstitch button or use your backstitch lever to go back over these stitches, so your sewing machine is going to sew backwards over those same stitches you just stitched forward. And then you're going to go back over it one more time, and then you'll keep sewing down. Now as you sew, try not to watch the needle moving up and down. Instead, try to focus on keeping the edge of the fabric lined up with the seam guide, which in our case is 5/8. And by doing this, your stitch line should maintain more of a straight line if you're just watching the edge of your fabric go against that seam guide. So you're going to want to sew slowly and guide the fabric with your hands while letting the feed dogs, which I showed you what those were in episode 2, pull the fabric through the machine for you. You don't want to push or pull the fabric as you sew, you're kind of just letting it, kind of just holding it against the 5/8 seam line and letting the machine do the work. You're just going to keep going all the way down the line, keeping it lined up with your 5/8 inch seam allowance. Now, once you get to the end, you're going to need to backstitch again. Now this time, we're just going to hit the backstitch button, go back 4 to 5 stitches, and then go forward again, and your backstitch is now complete. Now to remove the fabric from your sewing machine, you're going to use your hand wheel and pull your needle all the way up. You're going to pull your presser foot lever up, you're going to pull your fabric out. You can cut the string that is attached to your sewing machine still. And here is the straight line we just stitched. Your machine and fabric should already be prepped if you followed along from the previous lessons. For this napkin, we will be using a double rolled hem because it's simple, clean, and beginner friendly. The raw fabric edges get folded inside the hem, so the finished napkin looks neat and polished, and we don't have to worry about zigzag stitching the edges of our raw edges. So before we sew the napkin, we first need to press the hem into place. Pressing helps hold the fabric steady and makes the fabric much easier to sew evenly. So for the pressing, we're going to start by folding one edge of the fabric over about 1/2 inch and pressing the fold in with our iron. So grab your ruler, get 1/2 inch marked. Now, you can use a fabric marker, or you could put a pin there. Now that I've made that mark, I'm going to fold this over. I'm going to straighten it down, and then you're going to press that. So you're going to want 1/2 inch all the way down, and then we're going to fold it again, another 1/2 inch. So basically now we have 1 inch of fabric gone. So I originally cut out an 11 by 11 inch piece. This is now going to be 10 by 10 by the time we sew it. So I have pressed down now 2 1/2 inches of fabric, which makes 1 inch, and we will be stitching along this line right here. We're going to repeat this process on all 4 sides of the napkin. Now, another thing you can do, even though this pressing is holding it in place, I would recommend, after you press each side, putting a couple of pins in it. Now, to put a pin in, you can do it a couple of different ways. Personally, this is the way I use. You'll take the pin, you'll put it down through the fabric, and then you'll put it back up through the fabric. And that will hold this pressing in place, so it will really maintain its integrity when we're sewing. So I would recommend doing that. And especially at the corners, Make sure you have it tucked properly, and then put the pin through that corner to hold it into place, and then pop it back up through. And then just do that all along your folded edges. Now, as you can see, I've pinned down all the corners so they will not come undone. And now we are going to sew. Now that the hems are pressed into place, we're ready to start sewing the napkin. You're going to place one edge of the folded hem under the presser foot and line it up with the seam guide on your machine. And remember, ours should be landing at about 1/2 inch of seam allowance. So line it up, and 1/2 inch on this is right there, so it's lined up perfectly. Make sure everything stayed tucked. Okay, now that we've placed this edge under the presser foot and have lined it up with our 1/2 inch seam guide line, we're going to start sewing. We'll have to first start with a back stitch. So we're going to sew a few stitches forward, and then sew a few stitches backward. And then we're going to go all the way down. Remember, don't watch the needle as it goes up and down. We'll be watching the fabric lined up with the seam allowance guideline. So keep going, and you're going to go all the way down this line. Sew slowly and let the feed dogs pull the fabric through for you. I'm going to take this pin out since we're getting close to that section. I'm going to hold it in place with my finger. Still keep it lined up. Take your time. Now that we've made it to our next corner, we're going to sew on to the corner, but you're going to want to leave 1/2 inch because that is your seam allowance. After we leave 1/2 inch on that, which you'll see more in a second, you're going to want to leave the needle down in the fabric, lift your presser foot up, and then turn your fabric. And this is so we don't have to start a whole new line of stitching and backstitch it. Okay, so now we've turned it again. We've left 1/2 inch, so now we can begin sewing downwards again. And again, you're going to keep going all the way down with a 1/2 inch seam line. Take your pins out as you go. Just hold your finger there so the fabric stays where you want it to. And you're going to sew all the way down. Okay, so we're reaching the next corner here. So I'm going to pull the pin out, hold the fabric in place with my finger. And again, you don't want to sew completely down to the edge. You want to leave 1/2 inch. So you're going to keep going. And I'm going to say that's about 1/2 inch there. You can measure it. Keep the needle in the machine, lift your presser foot up, and turn your fabric. And then we're going to sew down again while keeping the 1/2 inch seam allowance. And again, for the last time, because this is going to be our last corner, we're going to sew down, make sure that fabric's tucked and everything's straight. I'm going to sew down and stop before we reach the complete end. Keep your needle down, lift your presser foot up, turn your fabric, put your presser foot back down, and then this is our last line we have to do. So you're going to sew all the way down to where you started. Take your pin out. And as you can see here, this is where we started. This is where our backstitch initially was. And that is exactly where we're going to be sewing to. Okay, once we hit that, we're going to backstitch one more time because we have to secure the end of our seam. And we're going to go forward one more time because we had to backstitch. Okay, you have reached the end of it. You can lift your needle up with your hand wheel, pull your presser foot up, pull your fabric out, cut the thread, and then you will have extra thread here from your back stitches that you did. So what you're going to do is you're going to cut that extra thread off. And here is our finished cloth napkin. This is 10 by 10 because remember, we cut an 11 by 11 inch square. We did half an inch seam allowance and folded it in again, which made an inch of it disappear on each side of the square. Here's the back where you sewed, and there's the front. And now you have a usable cloth napkin. Even though this cloth napkin was a fairly simple beginner sewing project, you have learned many of the foundational skills you need to know when sewing much larger projects. You've learned how to sew straight lines, how to pivot corners, how to sew hems, and how to create clean finished edges. Now, if you followed along through this entire beginner sewing series, you know how to set up your sewing machine, how to prep fabric, and how to sew. If you have liked following along with the Kozy Cures beginner sewing series, feel free to follow if you'd like more easy and understandable tutorials. And if you decided to make this cloth napkin project, I would love to see how it turned out in the comments and hear how it went.